join the wrong meeting now. So welcome everybody. So yes, normally there's a holding room on Zoom ahead of these, but it opened early. So thank you for bearing with us as the panel came together. I'm Rob Burley. I'm the Director of Care, Campaigns and Support at Muscular Dystrophy UK, and it's my real pleasure this afternoon to be chairing our virtual information session on FSHD. We've got a really packed agenda this afternoon with a fantastic array of speakers and a large panel to work with, which is fantastic. We're going to split the session into two parts, beginning with a discussion on research and a chance to ask any questions you might have on that topic. And also during that part of the session, we'll hear updates from FSHD UK and FSHD Europe. Delighted to welcome representatives from there. We'll then move on to a discussion around living with FSHD, where we'll have a sort of general discussion on the management of FSHD and living with the condition, and answer questions on those subjects as well. We've had a really good number of questions through in advance, and throughout the session you can use the Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. Due to the it makes it easier for us to manage the session by doing it that way rather than through the chat function or the hands up function or bringing people in live. I think someone earlier did have their hand up, so if you have any questions or comments, can you do it through the Q&A function, because we can't bring you in through the chat. Before we begin, a note that our helpline is available to anyone affected by muscle wasting and weakening conditions, and do please contact us if you have any questions or need any information or support, either sparked by today's discussion or just in general. You should have the number and email on your screen, but we're available on 0800 652 6352, or you can email info@musculardystrophyuk.org. And finally, a reminder that we are recording the session and it will be made available over the next few days. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Lorna Simpson from our research team now, who will be chairing the first part of today's session, and she'll start us off this afternoon, and I'll be back with you for the second half of the session. So Lorna, over to you.
Thank you, Rob. So good afternoon, everyone. As Rob said, my name is Lorna and I'm the research officer here at MD UK. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker of the afternoon, Professor Pete Zammit from King's College London, who'll be talking to us today about recent research in the field of FSHD. Just as a quick introduction, Professor Zammit began his research career at King's College London, where he completed a PhD in muscle regeneration before moving on to work at the Pasteur Institute in Paris. He then worked at Imperial College London, where he investigated muscle stem cell function and muscle regeneration before moving back to King's and establishing his own research group in 2005. His research is directed at understanding how muscle stem cells, which are responsible for skeletal muscle growth, homeostasis and repair, are regulated in healthy and diseased muscle. And his current projects include investigating stem cell dysfunction, mechanisms of disease progression and biomarkers in FSHD and Emery muscular dystrophy. Just to quickly reiterate what Rob said, if you have any research-related questions during the presentation, please submit these using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we can try and answer these at the end of the talk. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Pete, to start your presentation whenever you're ready. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully from our discussions earlier, that is working on full screen, is it? Okay, good. So I was going to give you just a bit of a background on FSHD research, starting very basic and then kind of moving up to the kind of where the research is. So just basics, people are made of cells. Each cell is essentially a small factory that makes proteins. So you have a nucleus that controls the cell, you have the cytoplasm where the manufacturing goes on. And it's important because collections of different cells work together to make all the different organs and specialized tissues such as muscle, lung, brain. So the cells are specialized to do this. And the cell then has lots of machinery to make proteins and to make specific proteins, and it has an energy supply in mitochondria and various organelles that are part of this process. Sorry about this. Okay. And cells are different essentially because they make proteins, they make different proteins. So if you have a hair cell, it makes special proteins that makes the hair work. but you don't want hair proteins to be made in a muscle because a muscle needs different proteins to perform its function of generating force, so that you make a cell specialized because of the different proteins it makes. So if we have that analogy, we've got the office, the nucleus, the factories. How do you make proteins? How do you select what proteins that you need to make? So you have these chromosomes, and they're essentially a library full of instruction manuals. Okay, so these are instruction manuals on how to make proteins. So in most humans, well, in humans, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 22 pairs are the same in men and women, called the autosomes. And then the last pair is different in men and women. Ladies have 2 X's, men have an X and Y, and that gives you the difference in the sexes. So this is important for FSHD, as we'll find out in a minute, because of one of the conditions caused by a problem in one of the chromosomes, this chromosome 4. So we have our chromosomes, and the chromosomes can be thought of essentially as instruction manuals. And they've got lots of chapters in those manuals, and each chapter tells you how to make a particular gene, to activate that gene to make a protein. So therefore, you have in every cell the ability to make any protein you want, but you just select particular genes to activate to make particular proteins that you need to make that cell special. i.e., you want to activate all the muscle genes to make a muscle cell function as a muscle cell. And so the chromosomes are essentially just made up of long, long strings of DNA. And DNA is a genetic code. Okay, so you've got chromosomes, you have the 22 autosomes in each cell, and then the specialized ones that make male and females, and each of those is just made up of long strings of DNA. And so what the cell does is it decides which genes it needs to activate, and it just copies those genes. And it makes those genes the copy of the DNA, and it makes it into something called RNA, which is just like photocopying the pages of that chapter, so that you can then use those instructions to make a particular protein. So here we have the double-stranded DNA. That's the DNA that is in the chromosomes. And you copy that, and you copy the gene, and you make an RNA copy. Obviously, the DNA is very important, so you don't want to get it corrupted or damaged, so you make a copy of it. So you keep the safe DNA in the nucleus, and you just make a copy of it. And that copy is only one-stranded, but it just copies that DNA sequence. And then what you do is you take that RNA copy, the photocopy of the chapter that tells you how to make your protein, you put it into send it into the cytoplasm, and there you then make a protein. And that protein has a specialist function that makes a muscle work as a muscle. And this whole process is controlled by things called transcription factors. So they decide which genes to activate, which chapters get read. So even though the cell has the ability to make any protein in the body, it only makes certain ones. And one of the ways it controls which ones it makes are these things called transcription factors. Now, this has become very relevant to FSHD in a moment. And so your RNA goes into the cytoplasm, into the factory, and it makes a protein. So therefore, you have your specialist protein. And what's important is that you've got this code. We've just said DNA is a code. And so the order that the DNA bases are in can be read off to give you instructions of the order to make your protein. So proteins are made up of amino acids. You have long strings of these amino acids, and the order that you put those amino acids in makes the protein have certain functions. So it's very important that you go from the DNA to the RNA to the protein, and you follow closely the order that the bases are in, because that tells you the order that you put the amino acids in, and so the order that you make your protein. And so we have something called the reading frame. So the DNA, as I commented, is a load of bases, 4 different bases, and just long strings of them. You copy that when you make RNA. And then what happens in the cytoplasm, in the ribosomes, is it reads the order of the bases. So if it reads a GCU, for example, it knows that it needs to put an amino acid called an alanine in that position. It then reads the next three and it sees an ACG. Oh, that tells it needs to put a threonine in. It reads the next three and it tells you you've got a glutamate. So you've got this code. And so by reading this code in groups of three, it tells you which order to put amino acids in. And there are lots and lots of different amino acids. So you can imagine how complex these proteins get. But their complexity is dictated by the DNA, because the DNA is telling you the order that you put these different amino acids in. And you can have very small proteins with 10 amino acids, or you can have very big proteins with hundreds of amino acids. And the way they function is dictated by that code in the DNA. So the chain of amino acids makes a protein that can then be folded and makes a 3D structure that is the protein that gives you the function that you need. And so this is what's happening in the cells. You're having the nucleus, which is full of DNA. You copy that DNA in a process called transcription to make RNA. That RNA then goes into the cytoplasm and is used as a template to make the protein, and it makes the protein in the order that the template tells it to put in the amino acids. Okay, and which genes are selected for transcription is dictated by things called transcription factors. So the cells in the body make these specialized tissues, muscle, bone, etc. And to be a specialized tissue, you need to make certain proteins. You need to make muscle proteins and not bone proteins for a muscle to function well. Similarly, in a bone, you don't want muscle genes, muscle proteins in bone, because that won't help bone to function as bone. So that's specialization. But as you've commented, to make every single cell has every single gene. So every single cell has the ability to make every single gene make every single protein in the body, but it doesn't want to. It only wants to make the proteins that it needs to function in the correct way. And so you select which genes are active, which chapters of the books you read and transcribe and use as instructions to make proteins. And one way you do this to select your genes is you methylate, you change the DNA so that it cannot be read. And if it can't be read, you can't then use it as an instruction template to make a protein. There's various ways to do that, but one way is by methylation. So if you don't have any methylation, then you make the gene is active, it can be transcribed to make a protein. But if you want to turn that gene off, so if you're a muscle cell and you want to turn off all the hair genes, one way is to methylate them all. And that means that when the transcription factor comes along to try and activate that gene, it can't because it's methylated. And so this turns genes off and stops genes being turned on. So you can think of it as a kind of mechanism to lock certain genes. So you lock all the bone genes in a muscle cell, but you don't lock the muscle genes because those are the ones you want. So in that analogy, it would be like it's locking the book. So you cannot read those chapters. So you cannot make that particular set of proteins. Now, why this is important is it's very important for FSHD because it underlies what causes FSHD. So as I commented, you have your chromosomes, the 46 chromosomes, and on chromosome 4, so one of the autosomes that both men and women have, at the very end of chromosome 4 are these rough 3,500 sequence of DNA. And that is just repeated. So you've got lots of these 3,500 DNA sequences, and they're called D4Z4 repeats. Okay, so if you look at the image here, you can just see you've got in the red where it says D4Z4, there's just lots and lots of these repeats in tandem, just end on, end on. Each of those is about 3.3 thousand base pairs, 3.3 thousand DNA bases, and there's just lots of repeats. And in the unaffected population, at the end of chromosome 4, you have from 10 of these repeats up to 100, 150, lots of these repeats. And they become highly methylated in all cells. So they're methylated, so they cannot be read and cannot be used to make proteins. So it is locked in unaffected individuals. And so you cannot read those chapters, those instruction chapters to make particular proteins. But what happens in FSHD is you lose some of these units. So these D4Z4 units, instead of having 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, you normally have less than 10. Now, when you have less than 10, the body doesn't recognize that that should be methylated, should be turned off. So the cell, because it's less than 10, doesn't recognize it as DNA that needs to be turned off. So it can then access it and make the proteins that it would encode. So you are broken, essentially, by having less than 10 units, you've broken the suppression. And therefore, you can then open those particular chapters that should be locked normally and make the proteins. So essentially what you're doing is you're de-repressing that particular piece of DNA in FSHD patients. And why that is so important is because each of those D4Z4 repeats, you remember you've got lots of them, but in FSHD you've got less than 10, but each one in it has a gene. Now that gene is normally not active, it doesn't make its protein because it's methylated, because it's in an array of hundreds or tens of these D4Z4 units. In FSHD, where you have less than 10, you don't have the repression that would normally occur. And because the repression's not there, the gene that's in each of these D4Z4 repeats is able to make its protein. So that's what happens in FSHD. You have a reduction of these units to 1 to 10. That's FSHD type 1. We also have FSHD type 2. And in FSHD type 2, you still have fewer units than you would normally have, but you also have a mutation in a protein that's important for methylating. So FSHD is slightly different. It has the same effect. You make this protein from these D4Z units that you wouldn't normally make. It's just the mechanism of how it occurs is slightly different in that a protein that normally turns off those D4Z4 units is mutated. So it cannot function as normal. And then in both cases, you just need a signal in the DNA that's next to the D4Z4 that just helps the RNA function. So those two events occur, then you get FSHD. And when you sometimes get a diagnosis, you get told that the size, they'll say 38 kilobases or 33 kilobases or 30 kilobases is the size of your D4Z4 contraction. And that literally just tells you how many units you have. If each one is about 3.5 kb, and you've got one that's 38, you can work out roughly, how many units that is. So the smaller that number is, from 38 kb down to 10 kb, means you've got fewer and fewer of those units, because it's just measuring the length of those units. And so what happens is you make this protein called DUX4 in muscle cells. And normally DUX4 is expressed very, very, very early on after fertilization in humans. So very early on after fertilization at the 4-cell stage to the 8-cell stage, there DUX4 operates because it has a role and does a job there to help activate genes. But roughly after the 8-cell stage in humans, it's turned off. And it's turned off by this methylation and various other methods, so it never appears again. But unfortunately in FSHD, because of those changes and the lack of D4Z4 units and the lack of suppression, DUX4 can be made again. But unfortunately, DUX4 is a transcription factor, so it controls other genes. So what happens in FSHD is you suddenly turn on a gene that's not meant to be in muscle, and it's not coordinated with the other genes that are expressed in muscle. So it just turns on genes kind of at random or that were important for very, very early development. And that upsets muscle function because suddenly you've got genes and proteins appearing that normally wouldn't be in muscle. And so that affects muscle's function. So it can affect the muscle's ability to repair, its ability to use oxygen to make energy, its ability to make other proteins and RNA, and it can cause the cell ultimately to die. So that's the problem, that you've got this protein, a transcription factor that controls genes suddenly appearing in muscle where it would normally never be expressed. And it then activates its genes that it would normally activate very early on in development when you were only 4 cells big in a muscle where it shouldn't be, and that just upsets the function, the smooth function of the muscle. So last few slides. So that's skeletal muscle and FSHD. So on the left where it says healthy, this is what a piece of muscle looks like. You have muscle fibers. This is a cross section. So if you think of muscles fibers as long tubes, you've cut across the tubes, so they're coming out of the screen towards you. So you're looking end on, like looking down a piece of hose pipe. So those are your muscle fibers. And as you can see, they're regular in size. They've got blue dots, which are the nuclei that control the muscle fibers sitting on the edge. On the right is a piece of FSHD muscle, and you can just see some of the salient features. The fibers are different sizes. You've got areas with the arrows where you've got inflammation and lots of cells that are inflammatory cells in the muscle. So you're seeing these changes to muscle that indicate that the muscle is dystrophic. It's unhappy muscle. Now, the muscle tries to respond to this damage being caused by having DUX4 in the muscle and making proteins that shouldn't be there, and it regenerates. So muscle can repair itself and make new muscle fibers. So here you see an example of 2 muscle fibers that are regenerating. They are reforming to replace some muscles that have been, some muscle fibers that have been damaged or lost. But unfortunately, they still have the same genetic problem. So they can repair and make a new muscle fiber. That muscle fiber can then still turn on DUX4, and the whole process then starts again of DUX4 being turned on in a newly made fiber and causing that fiber to break down and degenerate. And so you then have to repair it again. So you've got this constant cycle going on of damage, degeneration, repair, regeneration, but it just carries on going because you can never repair the muscle fiber without the problem being there of DUX4 being made. And this is just some work we've been doing quite recently. So in green, in the top left, are regenerating fibers. These are fibers that are regenerating. You see in this piece of muscle, there's lots of muscle that's regenerating. So the muscle's making a strong effort to repair itself because of the damage being caused by the DUX4 presence. So it can repair itself. But unfortunately, every time it repairs itself, the damage can occur again because the DUX4 is still made. So you go through these cycles. And so eventually you end up with an example on the left here of this piece of muscle that looks quite unhappy. On the right, that muscle looks still quite functional. You've got muscle fibers, they're quite big. You can see you've got scar tissue, that light pink in between the big round muscle fibers. But on the left, you can see that this muscle is really quite badly affected, lots of scar tissue there. And so that's not going to be functional or as functional as it could be. You've still got little areas where fibers are trying to regenerate, but they're in a hostile environment, lots of scar tissue and inflammation. So this is then going to cause that muscle to weaken and waste. And so this is quite a complicated table, but it came out from a review last year, but it's quite useful because it's just talking about how what therapies you can do for FSHD. So you see DUX4 on the middle, and you can see all the problems it can cause, oxidative stress, it can cause muscle wasting. And then below are just some of the ideas that people have to try and ameliorate, to stop this DUX4 causing the problems. So if you look in panel B, that's DNA levels. That's trying to affect the DNA. So if you can modify the DNA so that you can cause the DNA to be methylated again, you could turn off the gene. Or if you could alter the sequence of the gene and take away an important part that regulates it, the polyase signal. If you could destroy that by manipulating that piece of DNA, then the DUX4 wouldn't be able to be made because you destroy part of the regulatory region it needs. So these are all ways that you can affect the DNA. But obviously this is quite difficult because you're trying to affect the DNA in every cell. But the technology is rapidly advancing. So we're getting better and better at being able to specifically change DNA. C, if you look at C, that is the RNA. So we've said that you've got the DNA makes RNA. So again, you can interfere with the RNA. RNA has to be processed in certain ways, as we've commented, to make it a template that can then be read to make proteins. But if you muck about with the RNA, if you cause the RNA to degrade, specifically just that RNA for DUX4, or you play around with how it's processed, then if the RNA is not there, there's no template to make DUX4 protein. So that's intervening at the DNA level, at the RNA level, and then the protein level. We know that the protein is a transcription factor, so it binds DNA. So if you give it something that distracts it from binding to its correct site on all these genes that you don't want activated, so if you just give it some false targets, it binds to those instead, it won't be doing as much harm. Or you affect its ability to control transcription. It needs to recruit lots of other proteins with it to help it activate these genes that you don't want activated. But if you interfere with its ability to recruit those proteins, that will also have an effect. So those are all affecting the ability of D4, Z4 to make DUX4. But what's in the kind of most advanced trial right now is something called losapsolabamod, I can never say it, which is a drug that is meant to downregulate DUX4. So it interferes with the ability of the body to make DUX4. So that's the drug that's kind of in trial now. And then the last slide is just other ways that people are looking at. We know that FSHD has problems with energy metabolism. So when you use oxygen that you breathe in your mitochondria to make energy, in DUX4, you make a byproduct called a reactive oxygen species. And these are they normally get made by every mitochondria as it makes energy to power the cells of all people. But in FSHD, it seems to be a bit less efficient. You make more of this reactive oxygen species, and that can damage cells. So that's a lot of research that we're doing, is just looking into how you can counter this inefficient function of mitochondria when you make energy. And there was a clinical trial out a few years ago. There's a new one that's just come out quite recently, just saying that antioxidants seem to be a way that you can help counter some of the deleterious effects of FSHD. Okay, that was your brief journey through basic biology up to FSHD-ness.
Thank you, Peter. That was really interesting. It was great to see it all laid out from the very basics up to what we're doing now with the clinical trials and hearing about all the therapies that are in development. So we're having a couple of questions that are coming through from the Q&A, so I'll ask you a few of those if you're okay with that.
Yep, of course.
So you mentioned in your presentation that DUX4's main role is in the embryonic stage, up to the 8-cell stage, and it kind of gets turned off after that. So then presumably in FSHD patients, when DUX4 is being turned back on again, it's being expressed in all our cells of the body, not just skeletal muscle. So do we know why it is skeletal muscle in particular that is so sensitive? And this links to a question that someone's asked, where they've said that they know SFHD affects big muscles, but does it also eventually affect other muscles or tissue types in the body, such as digestion, bladder, heart, etc.?
So normally it's in the 4-cell, 8-cell stage. So yes, that's kind of very early on, and it then gets suppressed. Why it then turns on in muscle in particular, there is debate. People have found in kind of bits of DNA that control expression, and around where D4Z4 is on chromosome 4, there are some regions that look like they could drive muscle expression. So it might be that it's because it's driving that muscle expression that you get the effect. It may also be because muscle is called a syncytium. So each muscle fiber has hundreds of muscle nuclei. So it's one cell with hundreds of myonuclei. And so the idea may be that if you get DUX4 turned on in just one nucleus, because it shares cytoplasm with hundreds of other nuclei, you might get the whole fiber damaged, and that then causes it to generate. If it turns on in a cell like a liver cell, and there's only just one cell, if one cell dies, you probably wouldn't notice it because it seems to be quite a rare event. So it might just be the way muscle's structured, as well as specific drivers of genes in muscle that combine to make it a muscle issue. And also, if it's affecting energy metabolism, muscle uses lots of energy. So obviously, every time you walk, run, use muscle, you're generating force. And when you use a lot of muscle, you get hot because you're generating energy. And because muscle needs so much energy, it may be that if DUX4 or FSHD is affecting the energy metabolism, that's why you see it in muscle and not other tissues, just because you have this change in demand. You can go from sitting down to sprinting. And so you're suddenly changing the amount of energy you need to produce in that muscle quite drastically. And you're also reducing oxygen levels in that muscle. So again, all these metabolic changes that happen in muscle to the extreme may be more sensitive in FSHD patients than other people. So again, that's why you would see it in muscle.
Yeah, that makes sense, thanks. So if we were thinking about producing therapies for FSHD by switching off DUX4, would it then be important to make sure that these therapies were very specifically targeted to the muscle cells in particular? Would it cause any adverse effects if they kind of targeted the whole body indiscriminately?
It seems to be that, I mean, there are very kind of occasional papers that say it might be important in aspects of skin and in bone, but these are quite kind of rare papers, so it's not really known where else it is. I mean, it's expressed in the thymus and in the testes, and they are thought to be tissues that have lots of cell death. So DUX4 may be involved in killing cells that you don't want to work. So in thymus, you're making cells to make antibodies, and some of them you don't want, so you want to kill those. And in spermatogenesis, if you make a sperm that's not good, you want to get rid of it. So it may be involved in those roles, but they're probably kind of more minor roles. It would be better to get rid of DUX4, I think, in FSHD. If you can target to the muscle, it's safer.
Yeah, okay. So we had a question from someone in relation to the size of the repeats in the DZZ4. So you mentioned that FSHD usually happens when you've got 10 or fewer. So this person's wondering if the size of deletion affects the severity of the disease.
Yeah, there is evidence. So it's dominant. So everyone has 2 chromosome 4s, and you only need the contraction to be on one of the 2 chromosomes to get FSHD. You don't need it to be on both. So it's a dominant disease. And normally the adult onset, the kind of late onset type, patients tend to have kind of 10, maybe 8, 7 repeats. You do hear stories of, or there are people that have congenital, they have onset of FSHD right from birth almost, and they sometimes have hearing problems or mental issues as well. And these patients often have 1 or 2 repeats. So there's definitely a dose effect. But FSHD is quite variable. So people from the same family can have quite variable clinical symptoms, even though they are genetically similar because they've inherited the same D4Z4 copy number. So there are other factors that influence the clinical symptoms. But in general, if you have fewer repeats, right down to 1, 2, 3s, you have a more severe disease and maybe earlier onset as well.
Okay. So we've understandably got quite a lot of interest in the gene therapy side of things. So one person says that they understand that gene therapy is very difficult to achieve, but they're wondering if you think this is something that could be achievable in their lifetime, that we could have a gene therapy approach for FSHD. And another person in reference to the slide that you showed with the different approaches, was wondering if one of the ones you described was linked to exon skipping.
So yes, I mean the exon skipping, it's been used a lot in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, where you have a protein that is absent because of mutations. And the idea is if you could skip those mutations and just stick the two ends together, you'd make a protein that was shorter, but it would work. And that would be better than not having any protein at all. And one of those therapies, I think in box C, was that idea that if you got rid of exon 3, which has the poly-A signal, you skip that out, then the DUX4 won't function very well because it's lacking an important regulatory region at the end. So that is, they are using, so that is one of the therapies that has been tried, I think, by Julie Demonceau at UCL, amongst other people, of just trying to get rid of that poly-A signal to make the the DUX4 RNA unstable and then not make protein as efficiently. So yes, exon skipping is being tried at that stage.
So with the therapies, where I think most of the ones you mentioned were aimed at targeting DUX4 and preventing it from being expressed, so then trying to prevent further damage from being done, are there also approaches looking at promoting muscle regeneration? So a kind of, I guess, tandem approach of trying to stop more damage being done whilst also trying to promote the rescue of fibres that have already been lost.
Yeah, exactly. That's more our specialism, is we've worked on muscle stem cells. And so we're looking at ways that you could augment muscle regeneration. So, for example, those oxidative stress is an issue that you're damaging mitochondria and therefore damaging the function of the muscle. So what we're looking at is ways that you can make the mitochondria function better, because that way then when you repair a muscle, you can repair it more efficiently, because as the muscle fiber grows, it has to build in lots of mitochondria. So we're looking at ways that you can make this muscle make mitochondria better and the ones it has to function without damaging the cell as much. So we're looking at those oxidative stress. So we're interested in food supplements, for example, that are antioxidants. So people talk about vitamin C, and so those and things that help encourage mitochondria to be made. So we're kind of looking at it from that angle. And there are lots of drugs out there now that are targeted to mitochondria to stop oxidative stress. So again, we've been investigating some of those, and in tissue culture, they seem to work quite nicely, that you can improve a FSHD cell by stopping the mitochondria producing so many of these reactive oxygen species.
Yes, I think you've kind of covered this here, but there are people that are interested in the kind of antioxidant side of things. So they're asking if there are any supplements that they can take to avoid oxidative stress and destruction of the muscles. And I think someone referencing one of your slides is asking how much of vitamins E, C and zinc were given. Was it 100, 200%, etc. of recommended daily allowances?
On the slide, I've put the slide there, so it has the reference to it. I can't remember offhand the kind of volumes that they were using. That was from 2015, the clinical trial. I think their primary outcome measure was a 6-minute walk test, and it didn't pass that. So I think that's why there was that caveat with the trial, that the primary outcome wasn't met, but it did meet some of the other outcomes, like the muscle power did seem to improve. So it did seem to have positive effects. And they use zinc, selenium, vitamin C and E, I think, were the 4 supplements they gave. There's also the same group have just had a paper out this year where they've done another trial using similar antioxidants. And again, they said that that was quite positive. So there is some information out there, but the exact dosing offhand, I wouldn't know. Or I couldn't recommend.
Thank you. So we've had a question, this isn't in your area of expertise, but we've had a question in about the status of the Fulcrum clinical trial, and if we know the status of that. So I can say from an MD UK perspective that we know that all participants have been enrolled in the study, and that the company hoped to report the top line findings towards the end of 2024. I know one of our panelists, Raj, I haven't officially introduced you yet, but you might be able to give us a little update on this, if you're here.
No, it's exactly that. They're going to be publishing at the end of the year. They're definitely getting ready to start, pushing that losmapimod forward for a potential therapy for FSHD patients. So it's great news. They're working very hard. I think you'll have seen that Sanofi have joined they're merged. They've taken over Fulcrum. So there's really lots of work going on there between Fulcrum and Sanofi to get losmapimod through to a therapy. So fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because the phase 1, I think, was reported, and it's the phase 2 that they're on now. That's the
Phase
one.
three, Pete, now.
Phase what? Sorry,
Phase three now.
3, right? Okay.
Yeah,
so
they did phase 2 3 years ago, actually. So they finished that and then they launched into phase 3. So we have, I'll talk about it a bit later, but yeah, we have UK patients on losmapimod as well. So that's great.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, we'll just do one more question. If there are any questions we haven't covered so far, we can get back to you after the session, and some of the questions, particularly around exercise, we'll be covering in the Living Well session later on this afternoon. So we've had a question: does muscle use, overuse or underuse affect the reaction of DUX4? Should we be changing certain behaviours to reduce wasting? Do you know anything about that?
as I say, I think the exercise session is going to come up. So, I mean, it seems that doing exercise is good for FSHD, like most muscular dystrophies, but not overdoing it. So, things that raise your heart rate, but don't put too much kind of strain on the muscle. So I think we'll probably talk about that later. But yes, it's exercise for muscle is good. Muscle responds well to exercise.
Great, thank you. So thank you again for your talk and for answering our questions. So I think we'll move on to the next part of the session. So we're now going to be hearing from representatives from FSHD Europe and FSHD UK, who are here today to give us updates on the work that these organisations are doing. So to start off, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sheila Hawkins. So Sheila has been living with FSHD for 35 years and has been involved with MD UK for the past 20 years. So she's currently a member of our Services Development Committee and is a former member of our Board of Trustees. She joined FSHD Europe in 2018 and was appointed chair in 2022, and is here today to give us a brief update on the work that FSHD Europe is doing. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Sheila. So I'll hand over to you now for your presentation.
Thank you, Lorna. So FSH Europe, we represent FSH patients across Europe. And here we were last year at a conference in Milan on World FSH Day, so hence the oranges. So yeah, we're the voice for FSH patients across Europe, and our role is to promote awareness, understanding and knowledge of FSH. And it's really to work in a collaborative way between European countries, recognising where you have quite a rare condition that you can't necessarily find a solution in one country, and collaboration will, bring greater rewards. So we have 10 members in 9 countries, and I see if I can remember where they all are. But Spain, Italy, France, Netherlands, Belgium, UK, Denmark, and Sweden. So I think that's all of them. And interesting, FSH Italy has this logo of the turtle, and they choose that because it's slow and steady, but it goes a long way. And I kind of like that as an image for FSH and how people live with it. So what we're talking about really. So our vision, a world where FSH is easily diagnosed and it's easily treated. I mean, you could say where it's cured, but anyway, yeah, where FSH just isn't there really. And what we want to do, what our priorities are at the moment are in this year, first of all, when people are newly diagnosed and we want to help them navigate their way to whatever patient support groups there are in their own organisation. And often, if someone's you know, looking for FSH, it won't necessarily bring up muscular dystrophy Slovakia or Poland or something like that. So we want to help signpost people to where the local support is. We're very keen to support the development of patient groups and organisations. So, you know, loose groups of patients, helping them become organisations, and also patient registries where people sign up. I think someone's going to talk about this more later, but where people sign up to register their interest in clinical trials. And registries are important because they help show the you know, the number of patients there are, and to help prove that it's worth so it's worth investing in treatments for them. You know, the money is encourage drugs companies to think, yeah, we'll get involved in that. So that's we support that. We aim to raise the profile of FSH with regulators. So that's both the European Medicine Agency, who will approve whether any treatment is available in Europe, and its equivalent in the UK, which is the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority. And we're working with Rob on that so that we can, where there's any scope for overlap, we can do that. We're also looking to develop a patient advisory council. Just talked about the Fulcrum trial, and we know that the drugs companies want to check stuff out with patients, and the way we think is the best, and other conditions have done, is to develop a patient advisory council, so that if drugs companies have particular questions, they can kind of, you know, put it to a particular group of patients who have some knowledge of trials and how frameworks work. And an example of this was Roche are conducting trials at the moment, and they were talking with a group of patients about wearing, you know, wearable devices on your wrist, like a Fitbit or something like that. And it was the patients who said, well, you know, FSH is asymmetrical. Do you want me to wear it on my strong side or my weak side? And they said they haven't thought of that, but of course it makes sense. If you've got a condition like FSH, which arm do you want to measure, the strong one or the weak one? So we're looking to develop this patient advisory council, and we would like to get, we expect to get this set up by the end of this year. We are looking to create a group of about 30 patients across Europe, and if anyone is interested in hearing more about that, to contact me either through this email address, or I'm sure MD Rob and or Jackie or Lorna would forward your inquiries to me. You won't hear of anything immediately, but we are looking to put together a specification, and we would provide some training. We want people to undertake training to understand the context where they're being asked for advice. So yeah, we're probably looking for 3 or 4 patients from the UK who'd want to be involved in that. We're looking to grow the membership of the organisation. At the moment, we have 10 members, but we would expect to be at least 16 by the end of 2024. And we're working in partnership with the European Trial Network, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we're the European partner for Project Mercury, which is a global initiative to speed up the process from research to patients, and other people will talk about that later, I think. European Trial Network works in partnership with FSHD Europe, and its aim is to bring researchers and clinicians together. And the chair is Professor Dr. Nicole Vermans, based in the Netherlands, and our project manager, we have a joint project manager, Ria de Haas. And we have 5 working groups, and we aim to have a patient representative in each of those working groups. And we are looking wherever possible to have a Europe-wide approach, so consistency. So one of the things that Working Group 1 have done is develop a more consistent approach to the process of diagnosis. I naively thought it was just like taking a COVID test, and some red line would prove something, but it's a lot more complicated. So yeah, that kind of stuff. We're working closely with the scientists to encourage, to make sure that we have a European approach wherever possible. I think that's it really. So let's say if you're interested in hearing more about the patient council, just to contact me at this address. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. So I think you're staying on for our Living Well session this afternoon.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any questions for Sheila, then she'll be available to answer them there. But I'm delighted now to introduce Raj Badiani. Raj also lives with FSHD, having been diagnosed with the condition in 2016. And 3 years ago, she founded FSHD UK as a voluntary group whose focus is on bringing clinical trials for FSHD closer to the UK. So excitingly, this work is now coming to fruition, and FSHD UK has recently been awarded charity status. So thank you for joining us today, Raj, and I'll hand over to you to give us your update from FSHD UK.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share. I think Jacqueline doesn't have my document yet. I don't think so. Just tell me if you can see it once I'm back in with you. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that now.
Excellent. I'll just put it into presentation mode. So, hello everybody. Yes, I'm Raj Badiani. My full name's Rajeshri. Believe it or not, it's exactly 3 years minus 3 weeks ago that I actually launched FSHD UK on the MD UK Muscle Matters session, which was a little bit nerve-wracking because I didn't really know what we were going to do, but I knew we needed to do something. I got diagnosed with FSHD almost, 2017 formally, but it has started much earlier. As most of you know, it sort of takes a while before you think there's something genuinely wrong and need to get to the bottom of it. So that was my story, and 2 things prompted me to do this. My mum had FSHD. She passed away in 2020. And the other thing that prompted me was that I'd been knocking on the door of each European country to say, or even the USA, to say, is there a cure? Can I do something? Can I be there? And basically the answer was no. You couldn't cross boundaries and you couldn't join them. And the Fulcrum trial that Pete mentioned and some of you know about had been going on. And I think they tried to get to the UK, but they didn't. And it suddenly woke up something in me to say I needed to do something. And luckily, it's been a phenomenal journey from July 2021 to now, as you'll see that a lot of the people who are talking on this group were involved in that. And as a group, we've really tried to make a difference, and it's paying off. So I really hope all of you on the call, and thank you to MD UK for giving us this opportunity to share this space with them. So we work very well together. We work on lots of things together, and Kate's been part of the group. Sheila was part of the group early on. So a lot of people on this call today were part of this, as you'll see their names. So I'll take you through our journey, and very, very happy to take any questions as well. So first of all, I'd like to say World FSHD Day. Happy World FSHD Day. We will unite to find a cure. There's lots of media stuff going on today, and today is our day, so we should celebrate it. And we are on our way to a cure. I'm absolutely positive about that now. We started this, as I said, as really a focus on clinical trials. I mean, MD UK do a fantastic job. They look after so many conditions, but we needed to focus on FSHD, and that's probably where we've played this role together with them, actually, and other people as well, with FSHD Society, the European team, and also the UK FSHD Registry. And we wanted it to be a multi-stakeholder group because, as many of you know, it's never one group. It's a group of people with different skill sets that can make a difference. And so this was our vision, that it was patients, but also the clinicians, the research team, Pete Zammit, for example, Dr. Matthews, who you'll see in a minute. She's also on our group, the UK Registry. And the other thing we didn't want to forget is that industry. So the pharmaceuticals are very, very important in this game, as we all know. And they hadn't really had a group to work with in the UK. So actually we stepped into that space and we have built some really good relationships with them. And we've also started to make the MHRA, as Sheila mentioned, and also NICE, who actually approved the money side of things, started to get to know them as well. But it's early days, and we will be working with Rob and the team and Kate as well to pushing that forward, as we talked about Fulcrum and losmapimod a few minutes ago. We started with a group of about 15. We're now about 30 plus, and you'll see their names up in the lights in a few minutes. But you can see that we have a really good representation in patients, in the clinicians, the clinical services, the research scientists, the registry, and the advocacy groups. And basically, we have a core team, which is the number first here, like 3 members in the core, and you'll see that a bit later as well. And that's really to keep the dynamic going, because I think the bigger the group, the harder it is to manage. But what we've done is split it up into 5 teams, 5 now. Actually, we started with 4. So team 1 is all about stakeholder management. What's the cost of FSHD? We did dip our toes into that a little bit, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And now that we're a charity, we need to start fundraising. Up until the charity started, and in fact now, even till now, it's all been voluntary work, and it's also been, I mean, now it's voluntary, but it's also money out of, say, my pocket or a couple of others that we've made these things happen. So we do need to raise funds to make some of the things that we want to do for our community, and you know, get to the vision of getting a clinical trial and through to a therapy. Team 2 is all about the clinical teams. Team 3 is patient engagement. Team 4 is research. And then now we have a tech team, which is really what's kind of become necessary as the charity started. I am in the midst of building a website, but it's not launched yet. So bear with me. It's on its way. What have we done? So as I mentioned, we built strong relationships. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but we also started to play on the international stage a little bit as well. We were working with the FSHD Society. There's the World FSHD Alliance. We're part of that. I'm on a subgroup that's with Treat NMD to do with FSHD data. We started to talk to the big pharmaceuticals, so Fulcrum, Dyne, Avidity, and a few others. And we also are now a Global Task Force member. That's a voting member on Project Mercury. And I'll tell you a little bit about that because that's very exciting. It's really expediting things, and I will talk to you about that in a second. Very early on, we had 3 UK hospitals working with us, and now there's 6, which is amazing. We also have Glasgow, who's observing at the moment, only because they have capacity issues, but they're very interested in taking on FSHD type activities that we've been doing. That includes patient engagement initiatives. So one of the things we want to try and do is build communities around the hospitals. It's an idea that I got from the USA because I had to present to them about 2 years ago on Patient Connect, which is an annual event that they run. And we will be publicizing that actually shortly because it's very well looking into that and some of the things that presented at that event. So watch out on our social media pages because we'll be putting a connect on that. But what I came back with was that we were trying to struggle to say, how do we get the patient community side of things going? And of course, the hospital sites are an absolute, magnet because we have patients at the hospital sites and we started to create engagement sessions there. So in 2022, we did one with St. George's, which is with Dr. Matthews, as I mentioned. In 2023, we did it in Oswestry, actually, that's where Nick, who's going to be presenting later, is working there. And in 2024, we've just had one at UCL, and which is one of the London sites that we have. We also did a social media piece of work for the European team when the survey came out around FSHD in 2022, and that got us launched on our social media presence as well. The health economics review was very much a dip in the water to test this out. This is a very, very complicated area in terms of what's the cost of FSHD versus what the benefit of a particular drug would be. And I'm glad to say that Rob and some of the other team members are going to be involved in this to help us work this out because it's quite a complex area. And this will progress under Project Mercury, as I'll share in a minute. And then the research scientists, so Dr. Zammit, Professor Zammit just spoke a minute ago, but he, along with some of the others, are part of our group. And for the first time ever, that group, along with the clinicians, met in November last year, which was fantastic. We had a really good session on understanding mutual requirements between the two groups. And that was fantastic. But I guess the best news is that we had 2 clinical trials started in the UK last year. Having been rebuffed in 2021, you know, Fulcrum tried to come to the UK, they didn't make it, but they came back. So we have Fulcrum phase 3 trials at both UCLH and Newcastle. And we also have the Roche trial at UCLH and Newcastle. That was in 2023. There are also what are called natural history studies. And these are fantastic, by the way, to get on to if you know, clinical trials at the moment in phase 1, 2, and 3 will take very limited number of people, and the criteria is very stringent in terms of what you can and what you must pass to get to the clinical trials. But natural history studies, I'm on Resolve, and that's a good way to understand your body. I saw a lot of questions about what does it mean for our muscles? What should we do in terms of exercise? And getting onto a natural history study really gives you an idea to understand how FSHD is affecting you at a level that you can't really think about. But when a physio person in a particular study is measuring you year in, year out in a particular way, it really helps you understand your body. So if you get a chance, and there are some more coming, as I'll tell you in a minute, please do try and think about joining natural history studies if you can't join the clinical trials for limited numbers, or we're in early stages, etc. And I guess the other piece of news is that, yes, by the end of 2023, we became a charity. So we are not even 3 years old yet, but we've really, we think we've made a difference with the help of the team that we have, which has been a fantastic team. And so what does 2024 hold? Charity took up a lot more work than I actually expected. The website is still not launched, and I'm about 8 months into working on it, but it is on its way. We're almost at the final stages. So we'll let you know when that's out. I think I've mentioned most of the other things on there, but the biggest one is that we now have 3 clinical trials. So Avidity, Fortitude, which is in phase 1 and 2. So they're only in Canada, the USA, and the UK, are at UCL and Sheffield, which was fantastic news, because I think some of you might have seen some of the results, and if you haven't, do try and join a session that's on this Thursday around that. Where they're presenting their results for, I think it's the first cohort that they would have taken on in June last year. The other study that I was talking about is the MOVE Plus, which is slightly more than the MOVE study, which is it has MRIs and a biopsy, although the biopsy is optional. And that allows patients to be on those kind of studies without the drugs, but it is a great way to understand your own condition, I have found anyway. And that will be in due course running at Sheffield, Salford, and St. George's, London. It's under an ethical approval, which is fantastic news. We're now starting to really work as a network, which was always our vision. And then supporting some of that work is a database piece of work that we want to do, because one of the things you have to prove to NICE, the people who approve the monies for the therapies that will eventually come through, you really have to prove how this condition is going to be worth the money. We've seen lots of things in the press about different conditions that, often fail to get approval, but you need this information. And some of that will come from some of these natural history studies. So if you can, please join and do those. They're good for you. They're good for some of the data that we'll need to collect. It's all anonymous. It won't name you personally. And then the final piece that I wanted to talk to you about is Project Mercury. Sheila mentioned we're part of Europe, which is fantastic. Regionally, we're working, we'll start to work in a great, the countries that Sheila mentioned, thinking about all of these things at a much bigger space, because it starts to make an impact. And the reason for that is that there probably are about 1 million people in the world that have FSHD, give or take. Don't quote me on that, but that's kind of the number that everyone's playing with. We have to make an impact, and rare diseases have very few numbers generally, as we know. So if you haven't registered with the UK registry, and if you wish to, please do so. That's where clinical trials are first, pharmaceuticals will go there. We need to get the numbers up for FSHD patients. And that's because Project Mercury is one of the, probably the thing that's really brought a lot of countries together. So its job is to try and take away the barriers that will be in place, the barriers that will stop us from getting the therapy. So if you don't have patients, you won't have pharmaceuticals. If we don't register for the registry, you won't have pharmaceuticals interested. It's a bit like, you know, if Tesco's don't have the shoppers, they won't produce the goods. If I can use that very silly analogy. But that's exactly what it is. The more patients, the more pharmaceuticals, the more the industry is going to be interested in being in this game to find a therapy. And we've seen that difference just in the last 3 years. You know, you only had sort of Fulcrum and a couple of others dying, Acceleron, etc. They were playing in that game. But now there's a huge number of pharmaceuticals in this game, and they're covering all of those angles that Professor Zammit was talking about in different types of therapies to help us, our patients. So the more we can help them to help us, it's good. So if you haven't already registered, please do so. If you can get on natural history studies, please do so. This is, of course, you're absolutely on your own choice, but it helps us to get the numbers up. And as such, where there's demand, there'll be a supply. The other thing is that obviously all the sites that are working have to have certain requirements. And so Project Mercury is also focusing on expanding the number of clinical trial sites. We're very lucky. We've got about 6, or as I mentioned, in the UK already working together. But this is to try and do it at a global level. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, is to remove the access aim. And I said, as I mentioned, that'd be a group working on that. Now, the good thing here is that there's 3 tiers. There's a global team working on Mercury. There's the regional team within FSHD Europe and Sheila's team and that work. And then there's obviously the national team, which for us is FSHD UK and MD UK together. So that's a great model to try and show both the pharmaceuticals and the regulatory authorities that as far as FSHD patients, the advocacy groups and the pharmaceuticals are all vested in this to make this happen. So it's a very exciting time for FSHD if you think about it from 3 years ago. So thank you to all of you who've helped to support us, which is fantastic. And the team who've been in FSHD UK, here are all their names. I won't go through them individually, but I can't thank any of them enough because they've given in for the last 3 years, week in, week out. We have a monthly team meeting with each group, and we have a core team meeting, and they've all turned up in force and helped us to unblock barriers to make this happen. So I just did a little pictorial there about how we're set up. I should mention the Muscular Dystrophy Support Centre. Ruth Hereford and her team there do a fantastic job of providing physiotherapy for some of the hospitals that don't have that. So Ruth and her team have been fantastic as well and supportive in this. So with that, I'd like to end and say thank you so much. You can contact us in any of these methods here. And as soon as we have our website up, I will share that with you on social media. And so please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Raj. Thank you. That was really interesting. I'm conscious that I've run over my little research session a little bit, and we've got a very busy Living Well session coming up. So I'll hand straight back to my colleague, Rob Burley, who'll be chairing the next part of the session. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Lorna, and a huge thanks to Raj, Sheila, and Peter. That was a really insightful sort of first half of the session. Yeah, as Lorna alluded to, we're really blessed to have a really sort of wide-ranging panel this afternoon for the second section, and some panelists staying with us as well. So I'm not going to read out bios as I would normally, but I'd start just by inviting the new panelists who haven't spoken yet just to introduce themselves and just say a few words either about the support they provide to people living with FSH or their experience of FSH. And then I think Emma has got some slides just to run through very quickly on kind of the management of FSH, and then I'll go to those with lived experience to reflect on that, and then move into questions. And I'll set myself the challenge of trying to go through all the questions we've received by 4 o'clock. So we'll see how we get on with that. So I will just introduce people who haven't spoken yet in order as I can see them. So I don't know if we see each other in the same order, but Kerry, you're first. So Kerry Spink, welcome. And if you could just introduce yourself and just say a few words about your connection to FSH. And then it's Nick next. I'll prep the next person as we go.
Thanks for that. So, yep, I'm Kerry. I am mum to identical twin boys, Oscar and Seb, who are now 13, who both have FSH. They have early onset form of FSH, so they right from when they were born, but didn't end up getting diagnosed until they were nearly 9. Over the past 5 years, I've been heavily involved as a volunteer, both with MD UK and done little bits with FSH UK and FSHD Europe to inform myself, and have eventually joined the team at MD UK earlier this year. So I'm now Trust Fundraising Manager for MD UK. In terms of what I've done there is really about making the voice for the paediatric patients, because early onset, as Peter referred to earlier, tend to have symptoms earlier and much more severely than the adult onset version. So we have lots of experience of fighting battles with councils and schools to get EHC plans, wheelchairs, housing adaptations, all of those sorts of things. But mainly it's around expediting the process to make sure that any trials that are coming up and research into treatments and cures bear in mind that children could be really good recipients of it, because most of the trials tend to focus on adults at the moment. I think that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic, thanks, Kerry. So I'll hand to Nick, and then it'll be Ronan and Astin next to say hello. So Nick.
Hi, my name's Nick Emery. I'm a clinical specialist physiotherapist in neuromuscular diseases, and I work at the Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt Orthopaedic Hospital alongside Professor Willis and Dr. Risha Cole-Thresher, and a small team of another 2 physios, care advisor, clinical nurse specialists, etc. We are one of the only 2 centres which care for both paediatrics and adults. I've been in neuromuscular disease now as a physiotherapist for 20 years and have a previous life as a London firefighter. That's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. And it's great to have you with us, because several of the questions relate to physiotherapy and exercise. So get ready, get warmed up. So Dr. Astin and then Anne Morgan.
Yeah, it's difficult to follow the firefighting experience. Ronan Astin, I'm one of the respiratory consultants, lead for Respiratory at University College Hospital, but I specialise in neurorespiratory and work at the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre at Queen Square alongside Enrico in that regard. And so I see patients with FSH across the whole spectrum of the condition, from mild to much more severely affected. And we try to take an overall holistic approach, but also a respiratory holistic approach, thinking of all aspects of respiratory care. And I rely on the whole MDT to support me in doing that. We are an adult centre, but we obviously transition children from notably GOSH, Great Ormond Street, but other centres as well.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ronan. So Anne next, and then on to Bernard. Anne.
Oh, hi, my name's Anne. I work as a neuromuscular advisor based in the southwest in Bristol. I work with adults and children that have neuromuscular conditions, so that includes FSH. I've probably been doing this job for just over 10 years now, and prior to that I was working in paediatrics. So I've got a particular interest in transition, and I've been able to work with MD UK in the past on their educational guidelines and standards of care for adults with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, another neuromuscular condition.
Fantastic, thanks, Anne. So on to Bernard, and then Emma is the last person who hasn't spoken yet, which is good timing, because then we can lead off with her slides. So Bernard.
Hi there, I'm Bernard, and apologies to some of you if you've seen my mug on Facebook already, as I had a video there to celebrate FSHD Day, Awareness Day. I was first diagnosed about 30 years ago. It's only been the last 10 or 12 years that it's really affected me. Mainly sort of climbing stairs, getting up from a low seat, and it does sort of restrict you, but I've just got to try and be positive. And as one of the strap lines in my video said, not to be ashamed to ask for help. Because I think I was very stubborn earlier on when I realised that things were going wrong. And I was grateful for MD UK for helping me with my sort of hip assessments and appeals. And so I just felt it'd be good to give something back to them in any way I can. So
thank you, Bernard. That's much appreciated. Thank you. So Emma, I'm going to hand to you. I think you've got a couple of slides you wanted to share just on the kind of the clinical management of FSH. If you could introduce yourself and then run through those. I'm going to be slightly unfair and try and knock off a question through your presentation, which is, and something that Sheila said as well about wearables on the strong side of the body. So we have had a question coming in about why does FSH sometimes affect only one side of the body? So if you're able, if you can cover that, that'd be great. If not, well, we'll move that question after your slide. So Emma, over to you.
Oh, grand. Thanks, everybody. It's really, really nice to be here and to see so many friendly and familiar faces on the panel. I'm sorry, I sort of prepared slides and perhaps I shouldn't have done, but actually I just thought it might be quite useful because we're talking about clinical services and also to show how everyone on the panel, how we all kind of integrate and work together, because I know this is true not only at St. George's, but also in all the other neuromuscular centres that are represented across the UK. So I did forget to introduce myself there. I'm just going to share my screen and share, sorry. Let me just do that again. There's always got to be one. You can't have a virtual meeting without somebody having a, there we go. Is that sharing with you?
Yes, that's sharing, but not in slide mode yet, but we can see the slides.
Okay. In slide mode now?
Yes, although it's in that mode where this really is looking behind the fourth wall, isn't it? It's in the mode where we can see the next slide as well, but that's fine if you're happy with that.
Well, I think that's fine. As I say, this was just to give an overview, really. So just to say, so I am Emma Matthews. I'm a consultant neurologist at St. George's Hospital. I've been a specialist in neuromuscular conditions for 10 years now. And obviously we provide services for all neuromuscular conditions at St. George's, but today we're focusing on those for FSHD. So I just thought it would be useful to start with this, to just say that I think when somebody comes to us in clinic, and the reason that we have multidisciplinary services is because you've already been introduced to other members of the team who all have different roles. So I'm obviously a neurologist, so I was trained initially in recognizing, investigating and diagnosing neuromuscular conditions and then moving on to treatment. So I fall obviously under medical specialties. But we have Dr. Astin with us here from the respiratory team, and in neuromuscular clinics, obviously we integrate frequently and very closely with respiratory colleagues as well as cardiology colleagues, but also we dip in and out of other medical specialties depending on different needs through the life journey. But I think what I just wanted to highlight was it's not all obviously just about the medical specialties in a neuromuscular service and in a clinic. So we've been introduced as well to our therapy colleagues. I have a separate slide for care advisors. I'm so sorry, Anne, but obviously multiple therapies. And again, it may not be that every member of the therapy team is present or needed in each individual consultation, and you have contact in and out throughout life course. But I think as well, it's very important that we don't lose sight of all of the holistic questions and needs. So when we think, how is the neuromuscular condition going to impact on somebody? Obviously, we always have to think as well, housing and working, and are there carer needs? Can you drive? Can you have public transport? How will this impact on work? How will this impact on education? But we've heard today, obviously, there are many charities. MD UK is supporting us with this webinar today. Raj, who is endlessly impressive and tireless in her pursuit of work for FSHD, setting up FSHD UK, also FSHD Society in the US. But also here because everybody's very interested in researching clinical trials. And again, these are conversations that we have in the clinic. And then family planning. So what happens if you want to have a child with FSHD? How might that impact you? But also FSHD is a genetic condition, so we consider all of these things in the clinic. So the way our services are set up, and I suspect these very much mirror, as I say, the other regional clinics that you've heard about today from Sheffield, UCL, etc. So we have if you like, the neuromuscular clinic that is a multidisciplinary clinic. So I don't sit in this clinic by myself. I'm joined by a care advisor. We also have a physiotherapist, and we also have a neurogenetics nurse. So they run their own clinics and their own services, but also parallel and interact and are present at the same time as the neuromuscular clinic is running. Now, often neuromuscular clinics, because it's quite a rare specialty, might take place in a tertiary hospital. But so we try, and I know down in Bristol as well, they do a lot of outreach clinics. So we will try to go out to smaller community hospitals to see people who may really struggle to make what might be quite a long journey towards a tertiary hospital. Our other medical specialty colleagues, we also have a separate complex pregnancy multidisciplinary team clinic. Other specialties, for example, is orthopedics as needed. And psychology, I'm sure you're all aware, is often, unfortunately, quite difficult to access. So our care advisors and our therapists have started to run some social peer support, living well online sessions, very similar to today's, but shorter in nature, an hour at a time. But we've been lucky to be able to be joined in some of those by a psychology assistant as well. So I think just I'm going to skip over this briefly, but just to say, if I meet someone for the very first time in clinic, obviously I'm wondering, are we making a new diagnosis? Are we being asked, you know, what is the cause of the muscle symptoms, and are we going to make a new diagnosis of FSHD? Or it may be that sometimes I see people who've had this diagnosis for a long time, or it may be in the family and they've really suspected for a long time that now they are affected, but they've just perhaps lost contact with a neurologist. So I always kind of revisit and say, you know, what do you understand about FSHD? What do you know about it? What does it mean to you? And then look to see how we signpost to sources of information and support. Raj has talked about the UK registry, and I do really encourage everyone to try and join this if you can and are interested. If you are interested in research, they will go to the registry and advise of trials that are coming up, and they may look for eligible patients through the registry as well. But also the registry will send newsletters several times a year just to update. And but I think there's so many things, as I showed in that previous slide, so many inputs that not everything is going to be covered necessarily in every single clinic. And I think when you come to a neuromuscular service, hopefully, you know, I have patients I will look after, hopefully throughout the course of you know, their lifetime, and you form these relationships. And as I say, look at what they need right now in each appointment that you have. And then I think one other thing I just want to highlight about the clinical care of FSHD and any other neuromuscular condition really is to keep an open mind, because often I think every symptom can be just attributed to, well, it's because you have this condition. You may hear this from perhaps from the GP or other people, but I've certainly come across situations, for example, you know, might be somebody is complaining of feeling breathless, and then we might refer to our respiratory colleagues for neuromuscular weakness, but actually they have pulmonary fibrosis, or they have something else completely unrelated going on. Or similarly, you know, arm pain is obviously very common, limited arm movement, but actually let's not forget there could be something like a cervical prolapse and a pressing on a nerve root causing symptoms there. So it's very, very important not to become too narrow-minded and remember that other things can occur. I'm not going to talk about the key considerations for therapy because we have therapists who are far more able to speak to this than myself. But I think, again, just to say, you know, there are many domains that they will cover with you when you come to clinic. So obviously the immediate ones that we might all think about in terms of physical, but also environmental in terms of adjustments at work. I mentioned transport, where you are living and if this is accessible. And then all of the psychosocial aspects that I think, unfortunately, often maybe are missed out of some discussions. And I know that our care advisors, certainly in their clinics, they spend a lot of time focusing on these. And I just put this slide up for trials because we're talking about research earlier, and some of you, there's already been discussion about fulcrum. This is a little bit difficult to read, but just as Raj has also highlighted, there are a number of different companies working on trials in FSHD currently, and there are quite a few open, many of them still in the very early phase 1, which are safety trials. But again, if this is of interest to you, and I think, you know, to say Fulcrum has fully recruited, that's not the last opportunity for a clinical trial. So sorry, I hope I didn't talk too long. I'm going to exit.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Emma. While you exit, a couple of people have mentioned in their sort of remarks, and also we had a question about it, about the registry. I think the easiest, I just tried it while you were speaking. If you just Google FSHD registry, the first hit I got was the registry where you can find out more information, and the registry is funded by Muscular Dystrophy UK. So I suggest you either speak to your clinical team or have a Google after this, because you can find the website and some more information about how to join a registry.
Correct. You register online, Rob. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emma. That's great. I'm actually going to come to Bernard first. I was going to do it in kind of age order of patients to start with Kerry, but Bernard, it's something you mentioned just actually about the fact that your condition progressed over the last few years, having lived with it for a while, and sort of Emma's point about keeping an open mind and the progression. Just really interested to kind of hear your experience of reflecting back on what Emma shared about the holistic nature of the team, and kind of maybe how your needs have changed and how you've experienced that.
Yeah, I mean, it started as, say, 30 odd years ago. I was living in Derby then, and I went to the doctor because I was having a bad back, got referred to a specialist. And it was whilst he was looking at me, he says, "Did you realise one leg was thinner than the other?" Which I hadn't. And it happened to be my left leg, which was my stronger leg at the time from playing football. And then, so that resulted in sort of muscle biopsies, blood tests, etc. And they came out, it seemed like you got FSHD, and that was it, just move on, sort of thing. And I was still active enough after that. I mean, I was a postman after that. I was running bars, up and down cellar steps. So it wasn't really affecting me until I sort of moved around a bit. And then I was in Devon and I was working in a hotel and just trying to carry sort of things upstairs. I thought, I'm struggling now. So got referred to another GP because I've moved down to Devon by then went up to Newcastle to the genetics centre, who again did more tests and muscle biopsies. And I've got to admit, a lot of what they were telling me in their letter just went over my head. It was all very scientific, but they were sort of saying what it wasn't, but not clinically saying what it was. So I've just always assumed I've had FSHD, and then it's just sort of, as time's gone on, like I say, climbing stairs is an issue now. So I live on the ground floor. I always now carry a cushion with me in the car. So if I'm going to a restaurant, not knowing what the seats are like, even in doctor's surgeries, the seats are often too low down. And it's just general sort of thing people don't realise. They think you look normal enough, but it's just little things which can affect you, and that initially does your confidence, but then, as I say, you just try and work around it. And if you need help, you just ask for it now. And I just got to try and be positive, because then I'm diabetic as well. So then the exercise, they say, "Oh, you need to lose a bit of weight, so you exercise." I'm useless when it comes to exercising on my own. So if I was to join a group with it who've got similar conditions, I might be more willing to do that. So because I was at a meeting on Tuesday with Anne was there as well, and there was some good information given to me there. So that's something I might take up on as well. But it's just, I think one of the questions coming up is the one I asked, and it's the connection, because MD UK set up some new WhatsApp groups, and one of the chaps on the group I was in, he listed symptoms which are identical to what I have, but his is myositis, right? And so I just wondered if, that was if there's overlaps between two conditions like that. And perhaps I'm more having that condition than FSHD.
Thanks, Bernard. Bernard's gone rogue by answering a question as a panelist, but that's allowed. I don't know, Emma or Pete maybe a best place to answer. I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Emma or Peter.
Thank you. So I think I saw that. So polymyositis, I think, was the other condition. Yeah. So I think so polymyositis is a different condition from FSHD. So FSHD is a genetic condition, and polymyositis is what we call an acquired. So it's not due to a problem with genes. It's often due to the body creating antibodies or the body's immune system attacking the muscles. But there are some symptoms that are quite common throughout different neuromuscular disorders. So for example, you can't have pain in polymyositis. Obviously you can have pain or muscle.
I don't have any pain.
Okay, but these are, again, these are shared symptoms. The pattern of weakness is often a little bit different between polymyositis and FSHD, and that in polymyositis it's often proximal. So the shoulder girdle, that is shared, and actually with time it is shared as well, but around the pelvis, but without so much involvement of the face or the distal legs and the foot drop. So there are some differences there, but other things like fatigue, that is a very common symptom across all neuromuscular conditions. So I think it's not surprising in that sense why you have some shared symptoms, but they are different conditions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. I really appreciate you coming in on that. Kerry, I was going to come to you next, just in terms of as you sort of navigated the diagnosis of your twins and trying to get your head around that complex, holistic care that was mapped on the slide so well by Emma. And then I'll possibly then come to Anne next in her role as care advisor, how she supports people. But it's just great to hear your experience, Kerry, of kind of, how you've had to navigate that and kind of what your journey was.
I think it's still an ongoing journey, if I'm honest, Rob. There seems to be little less understanding about the early onset FSH rather than adult FSH, or the later, sort of the more typical pattern of FSH presentation. Certainly even among some of the specialists we've come across. My children are both deaf and were diagnosed very early as deaf at their newborn hearing screening. And that can be related to early onset FSH, but it wasn't picked up as FSH until they were 8, nearly 9, before we got a clinical diagnosis. And we went through lots of phases of misdiagnoses before then. So for any parents or other people who care for children who are sort of going through that at the moment, I would say, you know your child best and keep pushing for answers, because gut reaction told me there was something more there. In terms of frustration as parent, I think some of the other panelists have alluded to lack of mental health support. That really was very lacking in our diagnosis journey. We were given our diagnosis via letter, without even the courtesy of a phone call or a face-to-face conversation. So that was obviously a very big shock and bolt from the blue. But I think looking at that holistically for mental health support for the wider family as well, for siblings, parents, was something that was severely lacking. It's been really reassuring to see that MD UK has introduced so much in terms of therapeutic support over the past few months, and I know that's an ongoing project and there's more to come in terms of support groups via WhatsApp, but also counselling sessions, and then working with the Teapot Trust, I think it is, for art therapy for younger children. Those are things that we would have really benefited from 5 years ago. So it's great that those are being put in place now. It is a huge challenge. And I think MD UK, thank you to Anne if you're involved in the education guide. That is absolutely essential, I think, for any parents who are looking after children with FSH, because most of the schools won't ever have dealt with a child with any sort of dystrophy. So to understand how physically they are different from their peers, and how to approach that, especially at the primary school level when it's still sort of, physical activity is still a really big part of the curriculum, was really key for us to use those guides as well. So there's lots of support out there. It is a bit of a minefield. In terms of FSH, we do have a kind of a support group of parents. It happens to all be mums at the moment, purely because we seem to be the ones that are majorly the caregivers, but it's not specifically just for mums. I spent a long time this morning actually to a parent of a newly diagnosed child who's 8. I'm sad to see that some of the NHS processes are still there, but the great thing is that I could signpost to lots of things that we found along the way. And they found that group much quicker than I did going back then. So I think there are loads of signs that it's getting better, and it's still a learning process, it's still a journey. But it was has been challenging, still has its good days and bad days.
Thanks for sharing that, Kerry. I'm actually going to come to Ronan next, then on to Anne, because just wondering, Ronan, in terms of you're a respiratory specialist, but what we've heard so far is just that that sort of wide-ranging nature of support needs and the impact of FSH. So actually, when you're seeing a patient, you often find that they're asking questions from outside of your specialism, and therefore kind of trying to connect the dots for them as well. And then I'll move on to Anne, whose role it is to help people connect those dots outside of the medical stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although I would say that I work, luckily, in a very large and good MDT. So we have I would argue, almost all the support services they'd need. And it means that actually, in my experience where I work, is that people come to me already having found a lot of the support that they required, which is great. And I appreciate that's a lucky scenario for our patient cohort to be in. And I hope that was more widely the experience across the UK. But as you say, it doesn't stop, people coming to clinic with a range of different concerns. As Emma said, their problems that day aren't necessarily the problem they were referred with. So signposting them, trying to answer the questions, but obviously signposting them to our specialists is key. Aside from that, I think as the patient comes through the clinic door, I try to take quite a wide open view of them. And in particular in a respiratory condition, as Emma said, they don't just have potentially one condition, but can have lots of other things going on. So we try to do a sort of a full screen of respiratory health, and that then within that covers the FSH specific concerns as well as any others.
Thank you, Ronan. And Anne, yeah, over to you, because your role is to kind of help people navigate this sort of landscape, particularly if it's new to them. So yeah, how do you go about doing that? Kind of what do you find useful?
I would say yes, as an advisor, you're sort of a resource. I think most advisors work differently throughout the country. So if I talk a little bit how we do work in Bristol. So I'm based in Bristol, but we actually cover quite a large area. So we can go up as far as Gloucester and Wiltshire and down as far as Somerset. And then we also have team advisors in Devon and Cornwall. And I think what we try to do is be a resource for local services, so that your professionals, whether it be your physios or your OTs or linking in with schools or with work. So if I think about the children's side of it, if needed, it's helpful for parents maybe to give your contact details, so that if you're as a parent trying to say to the school, this is what's needed, but they're not listening, or they're giving you a hard time because your child's not been in school because they've been attending appointments or things, then they can use me as a so-called professional who can actually confirm what's being said and why a child might 1 minute seem like they can do something and then the next minute can't. And that goes for adults in the work environment as well. You're looking for reasonable adjustments for the needs. And I would say it's the idea of our service is that people can contact us in between their medical appointments. So the changes that happen with most neuromuscular conditions that happen over time. So your medical appointments might be fairly long in between, could be a year, could be 18 months, or if you've got a really busy service and you've been through COVID, sometimes it's been longer. So we always say you can contact us, and then if we can't answer the questions, then we can maybe point you in the right direction, or we can link you with other members of the team. So like a lot of areas, we've got a physio as part of our team. And we also have, within the adult side, we are lucky that we've got a counselling psychologist. But on the paediatric side, we don't, and we very, very much miss that. So again, it's great what's already been done by MD UK, but I think it should be integral to all neuromuscular services that there is an access to psychology. And then the other side of it, which we're really lucky with, is that our service is set up so we can support activities that help improve knowledge among local professionals on an education way. And we also do things for our patient group as well. So that would be muscle cafes, or we've done them on Zoom with COVID and face-to-face, which is where I met Bernard the other day, and yesterday, wasn't it? And that was supported by MD UK. And it's lovely because I think from yesterday, when you can meet other people with the condition, hear about their experiences, that's the best. And then I'm fortunate that I can also share with people information about things they can access from benefits. So maybe if they have questions about going on holiday, or sometimes we can go through a whole range of the different things just to make sure that things are covered. So yeah, there's a wealth of things I could talk about, but I think that's enough for now.
Thanks, Anne. That's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to bring Nick in now. We had lots of questions in advance and several in the chat just around the importance of exercise. So I guess kind of, Nick, your insight into kind of why exercise is important for FSHD, but also any types of exercise to avoid or to particularly do. And a question we always get is, can you over exercise and do damage with a condition like FSH?
Well, if I start with the last one first, anyone can do damage if they over-exercise. Muscles will respond to a certain level of exercise, but if we over-exercise, we will still damage muscle, and it can lead to what's called myoglobinuria. So basically, you're passing muscle protein out through your urine. That's more likely to happen with FSHD, but it's extremely rare, and I would emphasize it's extremely rare. Types of exercise to avoid, I would say lifting heavy weights, especially what we would say eccentrically. So that's lowering a weight under load. That puts more strain on a muscle when you're lowering a weight under load. Probably what I would advocate is an increase in activity, and whether we move away from the actual term of exercise and say, we'd like you to increase your activity, and whatever you find enjoyable to do that, whether that be walking, whether that be cycling, whether that be swimming. But, and I will use this little caveat, exercise or activity doesn't need to be enjoyable. What you need to find is reward at the end of when you've finished. So if you give yourself a pat on the back and you feel a little bit better after you've done it, that's the important part. And I would say that probably what we've termed cardiorespiratory exercise is going to be the benefit that has more overall benefit. You're going to get a little bit of muscle adaptation from cardiorespiratory exercise. So that just means working the muscles in an anaerobic way. So you're not doing things anaerobically. Aerobic means just with oxygen. So you're producing energy through oxygen. I would say that when Professor Zammit said about, we've got this ROS, so this reactive oxidative stress, whenever you exercise, you get ROS. So it's a bit of a contradiction in a way. We want people to do this activity, upregulate that ROS effect. But what exercise has been shown is it's slightly anti-inflammatory in the long term and during exercise and post-exercise. So that's probably good for FSHD. You're also improving the capacity of the muscle to be able to work for longer. So it might reduce fatigue over time. You can upregulate mitochondria, so you can get more mitochondria within the cell to produce more energy. So again, that's a benefit. And you have the added benefit of also that you're exercising your heart and lungs, making them healthier and more efficient. And from the psychological point of view, exercise has been shown to be good for depression, anxiety, etc. And we do see quite a lot of patients who are on that anxious, depressive side of the neuromuscular diseases. And FSHD fits in with that. If you've got a condition that's getting worse over time, you do find that people take a negative approach and have a negative view of what the future holds. And doing some exercise may make them feel a little bit more better, give them some self-efficacy, so they feel better because they're doing something for themselves. I suppose the big question that always gets brought up is how much do you do? How hard do you have to exercise? And there's a mnemonic called FIT, which is basically frequency, intensity, time, and type. So the frequency, how many times a week should you be exercising? I would say daily, but a little bit. You can break it down into 10-minute sessions, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon. Brilliant. Intensity, how hard do you want to exercise? And I think this is probably the hardest one to answer. I always err on the side of caution. If you feel your muscles a little bit fatigued when you're exercising, that's fine. You get a little bit of out of breath, and you can use what's called a talk test. So if you're exercising and you can talk and sing, that's really easy exercise. If you can exercise where you can talk but you can't sing, that's probably about the right level. If you can exercise at an intensity where you can only get 2 or 3 words out and you can't sing, that's hard exercise. So if you can sort of aim for that middle ground where you can talk in a full sentence, but you can't sing, that's about the right level. I know it's a bit woolly, but it sort of fits, okay? What I would say, and I'm going to answer Bernard's question here about, he was told like he's got type 2 diabetes and he's been told to exercise to lose weight. I would say that's probably not the greatest advice. It's very difficult to lose weight through exercise. You have to do an inordinate amount of exercise to lose weight. If you go by the recommendations from what's called the American College of Sports Medicine, who are the people who write the recommended levels that we should be exercising at, they say that if you exercise for that amount of time over a course of a year and you don't change your diet, you lose between 2 and 3 kilos, so between 5 and 7 pounds. The only real thing that makes a difference to weight is actually diet and exercise, but you have to really look carefully at your diet, especially from a diabetic point of view. And to go back to Bernard again, I'm sure that the MD Support Centre in Coventry and the Neuromuscular Centre in Winsford do online Zoom exercise classes. And so if he doesn't want to exercise on his own, that might be a way of accessing. You're going to feel part of a group and part of a community. Exercise activity on a regular basis is the best way to go. It's difficult to do. It's difficult to get into a habit of doing it. That's the key. It's a habit. It's like brushing your teeth. It's like getting dressed in the morning. It has to become part of your daily routine.
Sheila, I thought you might want to come in and mention of the centre. Over to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a shout out to the online exercise classes, which the support centre in Coventry started at the beginning of COVID, because we couldn't have hands-on exercise anymore. And there's a physiotherapist and maybe 6 others on screen like this, and we have an hour where we have directed exercise, and it's absolutely fantastic in the sense of really making you feel so much better. And I know I would not do this on my own, but I regularly log in every Tuesday afternoon, and and I actually think I've gained some muscle as a result of that. So absolutely brilliant. So yeah, so and I just can't praise it enough.
Thanks, Sheila. We had a question in advance about the link between sort of the question was, does FSHD cause fatigue? And then a question in the chat about why does FSHD cause fatigue? So I'm guessing the answer to the first one is yes, but it'd be interesting to hear so Emma and or Nick's view on kind of what is the relationship between fatigue and FSH. And it's not just FSH with the link, is there? Because I know we published last year with the help of some of Anne's care advisor colleagues elsewhere in the country a guide on fatigue and fatigue management. So it'd just be great to hear a bit about the fatigue side of the condition.
Do you want me to go? I'll go first then. I'm
unmuting. You go first, Nick.
So fatigue, everyone can experience fatigue when they're exercising or doing an activity. And fatigue is actually an emotion, and it's like pain. Pain's an emotion. So in a sense, your brain is determining what your muscle can do, and it's preserving its ability to be able to continue doing that activity. And so if it feels your muscle is overworking or coming to the limits of its ability, it will create fatigue to stop you continuing. However, if your muscles aren't working quite so well, or you've got less muscle bulk, you will experience fatigue earlier. It doesn't mean to say you're causing damage to your muscles, but you might be. And I think that's probably my take on fatigue.
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree, Nick. Again, it's a bit like the if anyone can damage their muscles if they exercise too much. We do all experience fatigue, and but as Nick says, I think exactly you experience it perhaps more quickly or more easily with a neuromuscular condition like FSHD. But I know, Rob, as you said, we have our care advisor Pam and Anna. I'm not sure if you're involved in these as well, but you have developed a fatigue guide, because I think then it's about adapting. It's not that then you can't therefore do anything ever. It's just adapting how much you do. And again, it's a bit like the exercise little and often, as opposed to trying to just keep on going. It's often beneficial to still be able to do the things that you want and enjoy. But the fatigue guide, I have to say, is fantastic. So I don't know, Rob, if you share that with everyone, but I think it's a really nice piece of work.
Thanks, Emmy. Yeah, no, we will share that in online after this as well, because it was great to have the support of Pam and colleagues to pull it together. So thank you. I'm conscious of time. Bernard's helped got a clock behind him, so I can't get away from the time. There's a really good question in the chat, actually directed to Bernard, but I'm going to ask it to Bernard, Sheila, Raj, and Kerry, actually, because I always think this aspect of these seminars is really interesting. Just Bernard, someone's asked what's if you had to choose one, what's the one best sort of adaptation that has helped you, or a bit of assistive equipment or technology? It'd be interested to hear everyone with lived experience or their view on that.
I would say that's been my riser recliner. I know, I mean, when I told my doctor, she said, well, that's not going to help your muscles, is it? But it just makes it far easier and comfortable. You know, you can lift your legs up as well. So I would say that's probably the best one at the moment.
Excellent. Is that attached to a wheelchair? Is it? Sorry, or is it
well, thankfully, I'm not in a wheelchair. You know, I still mobile using a stick. But obviously can't walk too far, or you know, in any sort of uneven terrain. But in the house, I'm fine. You know, I've lived fairly independently and able to do most things. But just getting up from things, that's, you know, the riser recliner, I'd say, is main difference.
Excellent. Raj, I'll come to you next, then Sheila. You got any tips?
I can't think of one, but I can talk about a luxury item that I treated myself to about 8 years ago. I bought a massage chair, and I'm just so glad I did. It's a humongous thing, and it takes up a lot of space. And I sort of thought, oh my goodness, how can I have such an ugly piece of furniture? But at the end of the day, it's brilliant. Or even sometimes during the day, I can nip in there and have a 10-minute massage on my back or my legs. And I have to be honest, it's paid its way through, even though it's disgustingly ugly, but I love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj. Sheila, I'll come to you next, and also going to give you another question in that someone has asked about the MD support centre, whether they have to be based in Birmingham to join the online classes. And I think the answer is no, but I'll let you come in on that.
The Muscular Dystrophy Support Centre takes referrals from all over the Midlands. So from as far as Lincolnshire all the way across to, say, Gloucestershire, and from Northamptonshire up to, well, probably Staffordshire. So if you live in the Midlands, you ask your GP or your neuromuscular specialist to refer you there.
Thank you very much. And I also should, before I let you answer the question about the adaptations, on top of that, there are some videos on the MD UK website about sort of seated exercise, other exercise videos.
Probably are, yeah.
Yeah, and if people want to be connected to other online classes or out their services, I suggest people contact our helpline, because we may be able to kind of connect people. So yeah, Sheila, over to you for your adaptation now.
Best piece of equipment is my power chair. So, you know, I suppose there's this whole thing about how long can you stay on your legs and all the rest. And I was walking with a stick, and then I was walking with a walking frame, and like Bernard, having problems getting up from chairs. And I'd be at, say, in meetings at work, and I'd be thinking, will I be able to stand up at the end of this meeting? How do I do that? All that kind of stress. And then 5 years ago, I broke my leg, and you know, haven't walked since. And actually being in a really good power chair has been so empowering. So I have a chair that'll go up and down, and it tilts, and I can drive into my van and just drive independently, and it's given me a whole new lease of life. I'm not worried about if it's windy, if it's slippy, anything like that. I can just get out and go. So I think having a really good wheelchair has been the best thing ever.
Brilliant, thank you. Kerry, I don't think anything has been particularly helpful to you and the family.
Well, I'm going to repeat exactly what Sheila's just said. Actually, as a parent, I think it was one of my biggest fears, you know, the idea of a wheelchair for your children. But as Sheila said, for anybody who's sort of fighting against that wheelchair, it was absolute freedom. And to see the joy on their faces when they could finally get to go back to dog walking and doing things that they wanted to do in their chairs. Bear in mind, they got chairs by age 10 with early onset. And most of the other children we know with FSH who have early onset also use wheelchairs, if not full time, most of the time. But like Sheila said, it supports them massively, which really helps with their fatigue and their pain management, because they've got specialist kind of foam backs that are all adapted for the way they sit. They've got recliners and rise and tilt. They zoom about. They're also power chair footballers now, because they've got so good at whizzing around in their normal daily chairs. That's played in a different type of chair, but yeah, I would say that's a real sense of freedom for them, and so they can go off to school, which they do independently by themselves every day with their friends. Rather than walk to school, they just go in their chairs or go down our local village and hang out with their mates like any other teenagers might, hopefully not causing any antisocial behaviour, I think. And just whilst I'm on, I would say the neuromuscular centres are brilliant. Sheila was talking about the one in Coventry. We've got one up in Winsford in Cheshire, which covers up the northwest, and I know there's ones around. I can see other questions about people in the rest of the country and up in Scotland and things, but there are, I think, several neuromuscular centres dotted around, so you might be able to find the one that's closest to you, because they're also really good.
Brilliant, thanks, Kerry. I can see Nick wants to come in as well, but it's fascinating. I attended a patient information day run at the Newcastle Centre for limb-girdle, actually, I think it was, but they presented research that showed that there's a point at which moving into a wheelchair actually raises your level of activity, because people wait to try and not make that step, but actually find that once they do, actually they become more independent and more able to exercise, which I thought was really interesting. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, that's basically my point.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's not. It's like energy preservation, isn't it? If you're really struggling to walk, then you don't do things you want to do. And if you can then preserve your energy, even if you're using a mobility scooter to get to where you want, and then you're able to enjoy that activity once you get there. And also that drive to remain ambulant or to remain walking can be dangerous, because there are falls if you fracture a hip. That could be life-threatening. So I think it's really difficult, but when I start from a neuromuscular centre and from being the neuromuscular specialist, we are trying to predict when a person is going to need to be moved into a wheelchair and prepare them for that loss, because it is a loss. You know, it's a big loss. You're driven to walk, and you're told you need to walk to preserve muscles, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's about preserving you as a human being and allowing you the opportunity to live your life to the fullest. And moving into a powered wheelchair can allow you access to the world again, instead of having a shrunken world where your walking ability limits you. You suddenly find that when you move into a powered wheelchair, your world opens up again.
Thanks, Nick. I'm really conscious of time. We've got about 3 minutes left, and I'm nervous about choosing one of the 26 questions we haven't managed to answer. So I think we'll definitely be doing a bit of work after this to pull together some information that we can share that have come out of these questions. Really, a real thanks to everybody who's participated. One question, I guess, for Emma or Peter, we might be able to take is just, this is a bit of a hospital pass because it probably is a very long answer, but why is it the case that FSHD can take so long to kind of manifest? I suppose is the word someone's used. Is there a particular reason for that?
I'm not on the clinical side. I mean, I think it's, as somebody commented earlier, it's you go when there are kind of issues with lifting or raising your arms above the shoulder, and when you then kind of get diagnosed, maybe at those teenage years, then anecdotally the parents might say, well, you never closed your eyes when you slept, even as a child, or you always had a kind of slightly asymmetric face. It implies that it has started subclinically earlier, and it's only when you get the more overt signs that you then go to seek the diagnosis. So it does seem to be kind of quite variable as well, though, depending on the number of units. Some people can be quite late, and there are probably lots of people in society that are just undiagnosed. They just think they're getting older, their muscles are just getting weaker It's part of the aging process. And if they're on that milder end, they may never ever get diagnosed as FSHD. Whereas if you've got something like Duchenne, then you get diagnosed because it's so obvious. Whereas I think the spectrum of FSHD is just so wide, and it's just such a wide clinical presentation that you can just kind of get mixed and overlooked. Sorry, Emma.
No, in the interest of time, I won't add anything because I agree. If we want to try to answer a few more questions. Oh, you're muted, Rob.
Do you know what? I lasted 2 hours until that happened. So thank you. Apologies for that. We have now reached the end of the session, unfortunately, and there are so many questions. A couple of questions are sort of specific around things like helping with explain things to school. I don't know if Jackie's still online, but if we could put up the slide with our helpline details, because we can definitely help with that kind of information. Or if you've got a pen handy, our email is info@musculardystrophyuk.org, or the helpline is 0800 652 6352. I'm always guilty of making promises on these calls in live time, which I shouldn't, but given the number of questions that we've had that we haven't been able to get to, we may well look at doing another session and going straight into a Q&A, just to try and cover off some of those questions, and if not, do some kind of blog that covers off some of the questions that have come through. The recording of this session will be available online shortly. And also we'll talk to the panelists about sharing the slides potentially as well. But with that said, with 30 seconds to go, I will just thank our panel. I won't name you all because there's so many of you and we're out of time with more, but thank you so much. It's been a fascinating session, really great mix of the research and the lived experience and the clinical side. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone who attended and listened as well, because the questions have been really helpful to help guide the conversation. So everybody, thank you very much indeed. Take care.